hello. It's so great. And Jen, thank you so much for this kind introduction of me. I don't know if I will be the role model today. I hope you will join me as well, because otherwise we might not make it out alive. But I don't want to scare you out because there's not that much you need to do it like right now. It's not as, let's say, DIY like Alex talked before was with Vue It Yourself, which is pretty cool. Get back, sit down, get some popcorn, because next Web Securities we will talk about horror movies. And I said, no worries, we will make it out alive. I'm not like the survivor girl or whatever you want to call it. We'll do it together. We will come up with a survival plan together. But before we do, a small disclaimer. I will touch on the plot points of some horror movies, obviously, because I use them as allegories. So no worries, I will not go too deep. I will not spoil everything, but still a proactive spoiler alert is in place. So you have been warned. And a small but still important content warning, because sometimes horror movies are scary, sometimes horror movies are explicit. I try to be as harmless as possible in wording, in presentation, and everything, but well, it's horror movies, right? So yeah, it's just the nature of things of them being horror. So I do my best, but worry with me. And if I'm too explicit, let's get a beer and talk about it. Well, did you see this dialogue line somewhere in horror movies? Doesn't need to be a scary movie, which we see here. I guess it was the second one. But anyway, it's a bad omen if a person says, I'll be right back, because we all know the person will not be right back. My other favorite when it comes to horror movies is this one. I guess you know it, right? If people are like, let's split up the gangs, because it's a wonderful idea to completely split up and do it all on our own, because it's so difficult for an opponent or enemy to basically catch up, right? Well, we all might be smirking. We say, like, we're so much better. We will never split up. We will never say, I will be back. And we're not Terminator. And anyway, but I wonder if it doesn't matter if it's security or a horror movie or anywhere where we're like, ha ha ha, we would never do that, right? Are we really better than those people? It doesn't need to be a horror-like situation, because I do ask myself this when it comes to security accidents, with all the importance when it comes to the security topic and all the things which could go wrong. And I do think there's a parallel in between web security or security issues in general and horror movies. And of course, a movie might not represent a complete same picture, but there are wonderful allegories in between to learn what is important in this big responsible topic or field of web security, which might feel overwhelming. But as said, we will get through this. We will survive together. We will get up with a survival plan. Those are headlines, which I didn't take from movies, actually. Those are scary headlines from media connected to the biggest security issues and incidents. So there are real-life horror movies in terms of web security, right? Think about Heartbeat, which is a vulnerability in the popular OpenSSL framework, or SolarWinds, which was basically a supply chain attack where attackers insert malicious pieces of code into the Orion framework, I guess? Yes. So there are loads of horror movies happening today. So let's get started. Let's get going. Let's come up with a survival plan. And the first point, which in movies happens, and it happens in real life for web security as well, is, well, friendly professor, friendly person, friendly colleague, whatever, to the rescue. In many movies, a team, a professor, a nerd, a wonderful friends will be there to help the protagonist, like this professor in Sinister. It's found in many movies, and in web security, there's a team which will help us see the risk. May it be people like you going to conferences, learning, but also when it comes to resources inside of the net. And there is one specific team which we will need to take a look at when it comes to their advice, and especially their warnings, because people in horror movies love to ignore warnings, right? We should be better than that. So let's take a look at that team. The team is OWASP, which is a shorthand for Open Worldwide Application Security Project. And their goal is to raise security inside of web as a whole. and they will help us to find the most dangerous risks in web. For example, by sharing resources, recommendation, but especially publishing a certain ranking. This ranking is basically the top 10 of the most important security risks to consider. And as far as I know, at least in last December 2024, they were collecting data for a new iteration of the ranking. So there will be new stuff ahead. I guess it might not be that different since the last time, which is 2021. But anyway, as I don't have those new results yet, because I guess they are not even in the nomination phase yet, but I need to check that out. We will go for the 2021. And yes, together with them, with the important points, which I think are perfect to fit inside of this 20-minute time frame or a 25-minute time frame, we will craft our own survival playbook. Like other horror movies will do it. Take a look at Scream, which is a perfect example for horror movie rules, horror movie patterns. We have patterns in security as well, or Zombieland. Okay, so let's get started. Stop talking, do. So what is the first allegory with one of the most important risks, in my opinion, and in the OWASP opinion as well? And to start with a horror movie allegory, it's this one, The Invisible Man. It's a fairly old movie, even though there was a remake, I guess, in 2020. The original film was released in 1933, I guess, yes. On a scientist who did some experiments, but comes out to be invisible because he failed one. And at first, he's not that much of a fan when it comes to being invisible, and he hides himself. But then he sees what possibility it gives to him being invisible. It starts with pranks because it's funny to basically shock or prank people being invisible, but it then turns to crimes and murders at some point. And I do think this is a wonderful allegory for the most important risk we have right now. In my opinion, and in the opinion of OWASP, it's broken access control. As said, first rank, it is the most prevalent and most biggest risk basically right now we have. And it's all things related to access control. So access control means a user cannot act outside of their intended permissions. So they cannot see stuff they shouldn't see, they cannot deal with stuff they shouldn't act with. Like basically anything where they act outside of their intended permission is a problem in access control. And yeah, if we have a failure here, that could lead to unauthorized information disclosure, modification, or destruction of data. Well, according to OWASP, this has the most occurrences in the contributed dataset. If we compare the movie to this issue in a little more detail, it's pretty obvious that the invisibility is the allegory here. It relates to unauthorized access. So we have attackers operating unseen. They can do things, see things, and we will not notice them. If you're invisible inside of the movie with Griffin, he is abusing his power, and the attacker will abuse their power as well. So they represent the privilege escalation. Basically, attackers having powers beyond what should be allowed. And of course, if we have someone abusing power they got granted inside of our system, paired with unauthorized access, which we will basically not notice, it will lead us to a false sense of security while there's lots of dangers are operated. So all the guards, all the locks can stop what they can see. And this is the same in the movie and in the security issue as well. We feel safe, right? But we shouldn't, because people can steal our data. And if you operate unseen, there's the problem that it's a traceless crime, right? So Griffin can commit crime without leaving evidence, and the attackers might be able to go unnoticed as well if it's not properly locked, or if they just happen to cheat on their privileges or permissions. So nobody will see them come, and he can hear every secret. He can see any data. Scary, right? But, well, how can we deal with that? So, if we have users inside of our application doing things, we should use one really important point. We should go by deny by default. We shouldn't allow users to basically see or interact with anything inside of an application unless It's a public resource that basically anyone can work with. And then, depending on the role they have, allow them to get accepted for features, information, stuff like that. Another point which is important, especially when it comes to people trying to access stuff, is rate limiting. So they cannot brute force their way into your system, right? This will minimize harm. And then, if you take a look at the sessions you got, which are often built with tokens, for example, you should invalidate them at a certain interval. For example, if you use JWT tokens, please try to keep them short-lived, refresh them all, let's say, I don't know, 2 hours or whatever you think is suitable for your users. And think about implementing the OAuth standard if you need longer running times of your sessions. So if you invalidate your tokens, the attack window will be smaller and smaller and smaller, because maybe the attacker will work on an outdated token. And last but not least, you can think about access control mechanisms. So there's not that much coarse resource sharing, for example, and people will have roles basically assigned to them, and they can act accordingly. There's an interesting open source tool which you might check out if you don't want to build an access control system on your own. It's called OpenFGA, and it's by the CNCF. So it's open source, you can use it. It's basically inspired by Google Sensibar, RBAC, but you cannot use attribute-based access control as well. So it doesn't need to be role-based if you don't like that. All right, next allegory. This is Hellraiser. So Pinhead, this person there in this basically poster, is pretty famous. It's a movie, I guess, from 1987, yes. And the plot revolves around the puzzle box, the Lemon configuration. And if a person solves this puzzle box, it opens a gateway to the hell-like realm of the Cenobite life forms, which Pinhead is basically one. And those Cenobites, or Pinhead as one of those Cenobites, is a monster to hunt people for experiments. And you don't want to be caught by those friends, because they are not friends to you. And basically, inside of the movie, at least the first part, or the first installment, a woman tries to resurrect the lover, I guess he's called Frank, who solves the puzzle and does become a victim. And if you think about a puzzle which you have inside of your hand, you try to solve it, decrypt it basically. What could this allegory, this movie refer to when it comes to security risk? Right? It's on cryptographic values. Not 100% metaphor, but still good, because the lemma configuration can be encrypted, can be decrypted. The solving is the decryption. So I do think it's a good picture for cryptographic values. Which is, I guess, in rankings before, it was basically used as sensitive data exposure. So basically pretty close to broken access control, but a little more narrower. But they decided to go for cryptographic failures now, because sensitive data exposure, so attackers get to steal data or get to release data, is a symptom of cryptographic failures. For example, if you are having no encryption of your connections, of your data flow, stuff like that. So failures related to cryptography or lack thereof. If we take a look closer and inspect the movie parallels, you can see that the puzzle box is the encryption system. The Cenobite haunting you or trying to catch you are the consequences of cryptographic failure. So if the puzzle or your encryption is correct or you don't have any, they will haunt you. The different dimensions there is in the movies can point to security context, and the resurrection of Frank, so the goal of the woman, is the failed data recovery, because obviously it might not work the way you think, even if you save people in this movie, right? Okay, what's our survival plan? How can we fight back against those Cenobite without, if we happen to solve that puzzle? So, well, classify your data. Oh, sorry, I'm a little too fast. I will start with the typical first solution: encrypt all sensitive data at rest. So yeah, just do it. Use SSH. Just do it. Then classify your data. Finally, it's not the first point. Try to identify which data is sensitive. So where do you need encryption or even more stricter encryption, and do it then. You should think about avoiding to store sensitive data unnecessarily. So if you don't need any data you're working with right now in your application, if you don't need it anymore, discard it as fast as possible. You could think about PCI DSS compliant tokenization or truncation, so people can not use it basically after you're done working with it. And last but not least, don't cache sensitive responsive if you don't need to. So people cannot just sniff on them, right? And of course, if you encrypt your sensitive data, you should use an up-to-date encryption like TLS or stuff like that. Don't think that FTP or SMTP might be enough. Okay. Yes, and then we will get to one of my favorite allegories. It's alien, and please bear with me if I'm not I try to be not too explicit, because I was thinking, okay, should I use this metaphor because it is explicit? But I couldn't resist because it's the perfect allegory for the rank 3 of this word, and maybe the most interesting point for us as front-end developers. But yes, I do my best to avoid too explicit language, but it's just the perfect allegory. So Alien, a movie of 1988. In case you don't know about Alien yet, it's basically, at least the first installment is on a space crew, which is investigating a derelict spaceship. And there they are a little too curious. Take a look at a certain being, let's say it like that. And then as a result, fast forward, they will be hunted by a deadly extraterrestrial creature called Xenomorph. Well, the being I referred to is one of the main characters. It was found in a spaceship, hatched from an egg. And it seems cute, even in the movie. And it's just want to hug people, but you shouldn't be hugged by it, right? You shouldn't be the crew, because this is exactly what happens. Because they were up for a special souvenir, which we are not up for, actually. So, what do I mean in detail? Well, I mean injection. Injection is basically if an attacker gets code into your system, which will be executed because it's compiled alongside your code, which you trust. So basically, inject it, like the facehugger did to the crew. And this makes the facehugger the initial attack vector. So the facehugger will make people to hosts, because they will make sure you will get an egg with you into the spaceship, basically. I hope this is not too explicit. Well, it will be a wonderful metaphor for an input validation bypass, so they can get hostile code into your system by using input fields or queries or URL. There are a couple of vectors you could use. So I do think that the facehugger is the initial system penetration and a good metaphor for that. Implantation is the next part. When the facehugger attaches to a human and makes it keep an egg with them, to say it like that. So this is the payload injection, so the actual code injection, when it gets into your code and basically being stored inside of your application. Yes, so implemented into your system. And then, via the chest burster, the xenomorph will be born. So the main alien, basically, in the movie, which will be born from the host and will hunt the space crew down. And this is the payload execution. So basically code execution, because it will be compiled, it will be executed alongside your code. And yes, the full-grown alien will haunt the system, the spaceship, will have complete system access and consume the resources in it. Well, perfect to explain injection, even though it's an alien or the xenomorph inside of the movie, and in our case, in the system, it will be the malicious code being executed. So, how can we fight xenomorphs or injected code by attackers? Well, when it comes to Vue, we are already pretty gifted because they do lots of escaping by default, which is pretty cool, right? So we already have a safe interface by using Vue, but normally you should have a safe API to begin with. So even though Vue will help you a lot because they use browser native APIs to escape like potential malicious code, please still remember to only use sources you trust. Go for a safe API, avoiding interpreters you don't know, or go for an ORM. It's always good to have a positive or a good server-side input validation. So not only relying on the front end, because there are other vectors such as URLs as well, which will not be connected to a input field. If you use SQL features, try to be really, conscious which features you use. Limit, for example, is a good idea to get the attack vector when it comes to SQL injection a little smaller. And something what Vue will already help you with is escape special characters using escape syntax. But just as a reminder what you do, and so you should do the same as well. So here's a simplified example. I still want to show it to you, even though Vue will help you with it. So you should do any sanitizing. It can be your library, could be on your own, stuff like that. So this example could be a quarantine system class to match the alien library. The sanitizing is like the decontamination, like these doors which clone up. Process of cleaning, framework language features like Vue use. Yes. This is briefly how this could work out. Like DOM Purify is one of those libraries you can use. You have the input content on it. You can allow tags by, for example, if you need some formatting, you can basically allow them, and then escape SQL characters if you have some like those. We will get to that later. And commands. And to be a little fast because of the time frame, you can find some regexes you can use to find suspicious pattern. I like, for example, those XSS, which will hunt for a script, or the SQL injection ones, like alter, drop, select, or the typical queries you might need to take a look at. But yeah, if you want to see more like the shell one, the netcat one, just post this in the recording later on. So you can use regex as well, which helps you a lot, catching those suspicious patterns. All right, so far for alien. Let's go for the next one, the blob. Well, this is not the most important point in the ranking, but I do think it's a really important reminder we need to put up, because the Blob, for example, the film or the movie by 1958, is an alien crashing an orb, and it envelops living beings, and it eats them. I don't know if you can call it eat, but it absorbs them to grow. And then it will grow even bigger and bigger and bigger, and it will become more red because it gets more aggressive. And what do you think about if you have something which grows bigger and bigger and bigger and gets more aggressive and more difficult to fight, even weapons cannot last long against it? What could this be in web development? Well, technical debt, or in specific, vulnerable and outdated dependency. Well, it's ranked 6 in the OWASP ranking, so a little deeper, and I cut out like 4 and 5 because of the time frame we have. It's difficult to test if you have vulnerable or outdated dependency, but you can have ways to basically try to keep these risks as low as possible. The movie parallels in between the blob and outdated dependencies is, as I already indicated, the blob's growth. Like, it hints to dependency sprawl. So as long as you wait or don't do something about it, it will grow and grow and grow and grow to a big technical debt you cannot fight again. The consumption of the victims is how vulnerabilities can spread, because they have vulnerability dependencies on their own, which can be outdated, and then it's like a non-stopping chain, right? And as this grows unstoppable, it is a wonderful picture of unmanaged dependencies, because at some point it will be really painful, if not impossible, to upgrade legacy code. So how can we try to stop the blob to grow, or basically fight it? So if you have got unused dependencies, please remove it. Same with unnecessary features, component, file, documentation, anything you don't need, remove it so it's not a dependency or don't need to be maintained anymore. Use tools, or basically try to get some overview of your tools and all the version numbers. You can use tools for it, like versions over, dependency check, retire.js. So you don't need to do it manually, no worries. But you should monitor the version numbers and basically try to get them at least pinged to you so you know you need to update something. This can be a dependabot, which is basically the most well-known way of having it. Don't ignore dependabots, hint, or PRs. They do have a reason. Test them maybe beforehand so it doesn't break your application, but still, don't ignore the warnings. You could think about monitoring resources like common vulnerability and exposures, like the CVE database or the National Vulnerability Database, NVD, news, all of those things. Maybe social media is a good, like Hacker News, stuff like that. You just try to stay up to date to find out about security issues. You should think about, if you go for a dependency, to go for official sources you trust, so they are not hijacked, because there have been issues in this regard before as well. NPM can be a little shady if you're not careful. And use secure links. Prefer signed packages if possible. And then you should try to monitor if a library gets unmaintained and then maybe kick it out. Because if it's not updated, it will raise security concerns and risk. And if someone else is not doing their homework, you might be up for grabs as well. And again, update your dependencies. Don't remember to not ignore dependabot, which is really important. You don't need to use dependabot though, because there's lots of scripts, lots of ways how you are basically supported by NPM, for example, as well. We could take a look at audit, which submits a description of the dependencies configured, and it will ask for a report of known vulnerabilities. And you can even fix it automatically if you want to by using the fix parameter. You could go by npm outdated, which will see if there are any installed packages are currently outdated. Maybe let them fail on an error code if they do, so you have a pipeline in place reminding you of that. You could take a look at Snyk as well, which is a pretty cool tool to help or test for security issues, or update safe via npm checked updates, which will upgrade your package.json dependencies to the latest version if your project is okay with that. So, of course, test your updates beforehand, have normal unit integration EG tests in place so you don't just accidentally break your application. But if you want to be really fast when it comes to updating, that might be a good idea. And as said, a new OWASP ranking will come up this year somewhere. I hope they will post some updates on that, but keep your eye open or peeled to see how the ranking changed in this year, like in between 21 and 25. If broken access control is still number one, we'll see. But anyway, at last, let me add some general rules as well. So without a horror movie allegory, but horror movies have pattern as well, so is it with security issues. So stay as a team. Don't feel alone in this. Tackle issue with the community, go to conferences, contribute, and tell frameworks. I guess the email address of Vue is security@Vue, something like that. So if you see a security issue, let them know so they can work on it. Be a team. Don't split up. Take care of your batteries. So if you, for example, have anti-batteries in phone or torch, it was never a good idea in horror movies to go further. In security, that means nurture your tools and software in use, so you are not caught empty-handed. Double check if the killer was defeated, because I guess many of us are annoyed if they don't do it and then they will get into an ambush in a horror movie. For security, that means test your code and fixes, log everything you need to know so a attacker will not go unnoticed. And at the other hand, you don't destroy your system by going for the latest changes. And take your professor's advice seriously. Don't ignore red flags or warnings. In horror movies, that often lead to people demise. And in web security, it's important as well. So when it comes to OWASP advice, when it comes to new security issues being announced inside of your dependencies, listen to those things, listen to best practices, be open to learn, be open to take a look at conference talks like this introductory one, but maybe even more advanced one which might follow up. Let's learn together, let's be a team, don't split up. Don't say I'll be back, we're in it together, and together we will survive this horror movie of security issues. My name is Ramona. I am a developer advocate at Zero, and if you want to learn about a project I'm working on, scan this QR code. But apart from that, I guess that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramona. We do have some
Give me
questions
a
for
second.
you.
I cannot hear you right now, but I guess now it's fine.
Can you hear me now?
Wonderful.
Perfect. Yay. We do have a couple questions for you.
Please.
The first one is, what are the most commonly overlooked security issues in Vue apps?
So I can only tell from my experience right now. And I'm so happy Vue helps us when it comes to injection with all the escaping they do by native browser APIs. However, broken access control is still a really important point. It's not like Vue specific, because I do think Vue shouldn't take care of everything, right? It's a framework. And especially if you implement loads of features, it will take away performance. So please keep broken access control inside of your mind. Oversight is the most important point as well. Think about how to build authentication or use a tool.
Thank you. Okay, and next question. How to host their website in GitHub without exposing their private key. Do you have any recommendations? They don't want to purchase hosting. How can they encrypt or obfuscate their secrets after compiling their site?
This is a really important question, because I hate if people commit their keys or stuff like that. I'm like, oh, and you don't need to do it. So think about going for environment variables like .env and use a git ignore, so it will not be used for being pushed. And of course, you will have a sample.env file, which just shows where the things are if people want to use it as well. But if you have a .env local file, which will actually store your keys, put it into a git ignore. And I do think, at least it's the thing by Netlify, I guess, but I'm not completely sure because I don't use it that much. GitHub Pages will have a secret function when it comes to environment variables, so they are not exposed. I do know that that's the case at Netlify, and I do think they have still some free plans, so you don't need to pay for hosting. If a hoster doesn't have a secret environment variable feature, I wouldn't use them personally.
And I believe I've used it recently on Netlify, and I used to use it the same thing on Vercel too, just to name another one. But that's a great call out. Thank you. That's all the questions we have for you today. Thank you for joining us today, Ramona.
Thank you so much for having me. And in case you got any questions, you can find me on all social media platforms like Blue Sky, LinkedIn, Twitter. So if you still come up with questions, just let me know.
Perfect. Thank you.